Well, folks, it's been a wild day yesterday and today, especially in the election world, and that goes in Canada and in the United States. We're going to look at some of that that's going on. We're going to take a look at what's going on in the economy and what all these indicators might mean for you, for your family, for your job, for your investments. Let's jump right into it as we thank our viewers in Canada and in the US and our listeners there also. And we look at what's happening in both countries and around the world. So the budget came down in Canada, notably the leader of the Liberal Party, the Prime Minister Carney, he had waited a long time to bring a budget down. Usually this is an annual event, and it had gone on quite past that. And the speculation was, is there going to be scary numbers related to the deficit? And in fact, there were. The deficit is being now projected a lot higher than had been predicted, $80 billion. That has impact because as we've said before, and as you've heard on this show, the amount of money it takes to take care of the debt, to service the debt and the deficit. Remember, the deficit, that's the money you're short at the end of the month. When you look at your household finances, if you have 2 months of deficit, then your debt keeps getting larger and larger. And as the debt gets larger, you have to make more and more payments. When you make payments to the bankers, that's money you can't be spending on things like healthcare or education or safe streets. And this is always the point of tension. And eventually you have to raise taxes to make up for that extra money that you're paying to the bankers. That's the challenge that the federal government is facing, and it is a formidable one. I'm going to say that there are some things there that we should note and give maybe just some quiet applause to. There is a realization that costs have to be reduced. Costs are not being radically reduced in this federal Liberal budget in Canada, but there are some reductions. There is some note, probably more just to satisfy some of the voters within the Liberal ranks who still have an eye on things like trying to balance a budget, which seems pretty common sense. So before we hit the end of the decade, they say there's going to be a reduction of 29,000 federal employees. Now, that isn't huge on a percentage basis. And where conservative parties make the mistake is they see that the costs of running the government are gigantic. And so they make announcements that there's going to be, wholesale massive reductions. They're going to come in there and just slash jobs. One thing to keep in mind, and this is for conservative parties or parties that are wanting to see reductions but still want to win elections, there's something called attrition, which is basically retirement. And depending on the particular government or the government body, attrition can be anywhere from 7% of the workforce to 11% of the workforce, depending on how rapidly people are aging out. You don't have to replace that, especially in this era of AI and amazing new efficiencies that can be achieved. Jobs that and tasks that normally would have taken even 5 years ago would have taken maybe 10 people to do can now be done in seconds of time just by using AI apps, and that's going to continue. So governments need to keep an eye on that, and by expanding the economy with proper policies, the so-called lost jobs can in fact be made up in other areas and other sectors. I want to talk about that in a minute. So overall, an expensive budget, some reductions here and there. I don't think it's going to be enough to push back the concerns you're going to get from investors. Why are investors important? Well, if you're thinking about retiring, or if you're retiring right now, guess what? Your investment fund, your retirement fund, is in fact invested in economies, first of all in the national economy and then around the world. So it is important to you as a retired person, or if you're looking forward to retire, the fund that keeps you going, that keeps the dollars going to you, depends on governments that have an understanding of economics and that can keep their governments rolling and can be attractive for investment. So it does matter how you vote and who you vote for. The next question related to Canada's budget is it does have to be passed in the House of Commons. There has to be a vote to pass the budget as is being proposed. It's one of the few elements in the Canadian parliamentary system. If a government cannot get its budget passed, then it collapses, and then it will force an election. And so the question is, because you have a minority government in Canada, in other words, the opposition parties all added up together, if they ever voted together on something, could actually have more votes than the existing Liberal Party that has a minority. And so the question is, are the opposition parties going to gang up on the government? Are they going to force an election? If you're looking for predictions, and don't put money on it, and if you do put money on my prediction that I'm going to make here, don't get mad at me if my prediction does not come out. Don't try and sue me. I'm not advising you on how to gamble, though there's a lot of gambling going on right now on whether the government will fall or not. I don't think it is going to fall on this budget. I could be wrong. A couple of indicators on that right now. Things are pretty well tied in the polls between the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party federally. They're neck and neck. What is different is, thanks to mainstream media report, the culturally Marxist media really seem to still have a bit of a love affair for the Prime Minister Carney. He's very endearing to them because of his globalist view of the universe. And so that will continue. And through an election time, when you have mainstream media showing support, maybe not directly, but even indirectly, that's what affects the undecided voters. Undecided voters over the last several elections in Canada and to a degree in the United States, the undecided voters are the people who really have a difficult time about making up their minds about almost anything. They're most influenced on any subject by the last person they talk to. And the last voice that people hear, the undecided hear when they're going to the polls to vote, is mainstream media. That's where the biggest influence falls, and that's why I think there will not be an election, because the Conservatives will be concerned about how media will be able to move the undecided vote. That's my guess. Now, if the Liberals really sense blood in the water and they sense that the Conservatives' opposition is falling, they might force an election to try and get their beloved majority. Once a country like Canada with the parliamentary system has, the party has a majority vote, they can almost do anything they want. So there's a bit of a dance going on. The other reason I don't think you'll see the Conservatives forcing the election, they had the unfortunate announcement right at the time of the budget of one of their members of parliament, a fairly well-known individual from his region, a guy by the name of Chris Entremont. He's from Nova Scotia. He was in the provincial legislature there, fairly well-known guy, and he defected to the Liberals. On budget day, it was confirmed and announced he moved from Conservative to Liberal, giving the Liberals one more vote. It shocked a lot of people, though some of us saw it coming. And one of the questions that he will have to face, first of all, this individual, Chris Entremont, member of Parliament, is the fact that when you get elected, do you have the right to jump ship, to jump to another party without first consulting your voters in your constituency? Did he put in place a process to see if, in fact, the voters that put him there, wanting him to serve in the Conservative Party, they weren't really consulted? This will haunt him. We'll see if that's going to affect him at the next election. But just by doing that, it sent a nervous note, of course, especially through the Conservative Party. Will there be more defections? Up until now, Pierre Poilievre, the leader, is seen in a strong position. He is a strong leader. He does have good policies, but mainstream media does not like him because he is a small c conservative. And if you are a culturally Marxist media reporter, you cannot help yourself in terms of showing your disdain for people who are true conservatives. So there's a bit of a tightrope going on there. A bit of a game of chicken. Let's watch and see where it rolls out. When you look at concerns that are being talked about with the Canadian economy, we see our members of parliament, we see mainstream media wringing their hands over what's called the loss of the auto sector, manufacturing and jobs in the auto sector. And woe is us, what are we going to do? It is a real problem. We are losing jobs in the auto sector. A lot of those are in the province of Ontario, and unfortunately the province of Ontario, its leader made what many are seeing as an unfortunate, unwise decision to take out ads in the United States which were attacking Donald Trump. And that's never an advisable thing to do, and is having serious ramifications. So is there an answer? Can the auto sector be preserved? You know, it sometimes serves us well to look around in other jurisdictions at this type of question. We often forget that the little country of Ireland, which was really an impoverished nation in the UK for decades and decades, really rose to prominence and still has some significant economic vitality because they made a decision to shift from socialist thinking to doing things like drastically reducing their tax regime, not just on individuals, but on businesses and on investment, and also really moving to common sense regulations and efficiency and not having so many administrators in place that elected people can't keep up with the regulatory growth that actually started for Ireland way back in the 50s. The thought leader at the time was a gentleman by the name of Whitaker, and he wrote an economic policy which really focused on keeping taxes down, keeping spending down, keeping government affordable so that companies could even relocate into your country and be successful because they weren't being taxed and regulated to death. Now he wrote that policy in the late 1950s, which seems like a long time ago, but policy does have consequences, and so you began to see in the 60s, and then this kept evolving through the 70s and 80s, more and more investment coming into Ireland. And you started to get the big name companies. You started to get Ford. You started to get from Europe, Volkswagen and other companies. When they started in that particular area, once you start to build a critical mass of innovation and investment, you do start drawing in like a magnet other companies. And so the high-tech sectors, the cyber sectors began to relocate to Ireland, all because it all started with a policy not of looking how to increase taxes and increase regulation, but in fact how to decrease in those areas, something the Canadian government might want to be thinking about. Let's switch to the U.S. and look at a very significant night last night on the electoral front. And New York City's the big item, but I want to first start with there was two governor races. One was in New Jersey, one was in Virginia. Virginia they called that a flip. It was previously a Republican governor. It's moved to Democrat. New Jersey, the governor there, the incumbency was Democrat, and that stayed in New Jersey. So some significant signals there, though these are regarded as blue areas. Blue in the United States represents the Democrat and or the center left, whereas blue in Canada represents the center and center right. So don't get the two confused. So we see the blue strongholds, already strongholds actually holding. In California, something interesting happened. This might be a bit confusing, but it's actually kind of simple when you break it down. There was a proposition that was put forward in California. When they want to do a significant change, it has to go before the people to vote, which is a very wise way of doing things, and something that Canada could probably look at, so you don't only have votes every 3 or 4 years, but in between those votes, you can have votes on individual items that are significant. And so in California, there was a vote which was going to shift how they do restructuring. Now, this is important. Don't glaze over. This is very significant, what's going to happen in California. By allowing the way the California can do restructuring, that means they can move the boundaries of constituencies, so-called depending on populations. They can look at one constituency, let's say, which might have a large rural component to it. They can change the boundaries and bring in huge numbers of urban voters. Urban voters tend to be center and center left. And that can affect how the votes go and how many seats or constituencies a party can win. With the power being shifted to governments in California on how they can do the redistricting, and they are going to do it now, the projection is it could give them up to 5 more Democrat seats. 5 more Democrat seats as early as the midterm elections. That can be very significant in terms of is it going to be Democrats or Republicans who control the House. So keep an eye on that. That was a significant move last night. And of course, the big story and the big move in the U.S. on elections was Zoran Mondani being elected. Listen, there's nothing more that I can say in terms of trying to terrify everybody about just how far to the left. He is an extreme leftist, very much leaning in favor of what some would call Islamist tendencies, very much not a free marketer, really believes, a true doctrinaire socialist, really believes in trying to take over as much distribution and production as possible within a particular society. So I don't think there could have been more scare tactics brought out about this guy than have already been brought out. The fact is, New York City has for a mayor now an extreme left-leaning socialist, and we'll see what that is going to bring in the future. Now, one of the things that we're already starting to see is there was concern about movement out of New York City by individual property owners and even by businesses. What wasn't largely reported were the number of real estate closings in Florida coming out of New York over the last 2 to 3 months, a considerable uptick. Most news stories were saying, well, we're going to wait and see what happens, and are we going to see a considerable rise in real estate movement and investors out of New York. In fact, it had been happening significantly. It continues to happen significantly. We do expect to see property values going up in Florida, more people moving to Florida as a result of what people are seeing as going to be a very stagnant economy in New York City. I predict the economy will stagnate there. I predict that we will see some of the problems related to social problems and crime going up. I hope that doesn't happen. So a lot of people have been saying, well, you know what, this is good because now people will learn their lesson and they won't vote that way again. But in fact, it doesn't really work that way. Once a government brings in large-scale socialist programs where people see things as basically being free, it's very difficult. That government, once the economy crashes, as it always does in those environments, but it sometimes takes years for the economy to get so bad that even the people who want all the free stuff are saying, these policies are really hurting us. Everything's getting more expensive. So we're going to see, I think, long-term negative effects on the city of New York unless this mayor is really turfed out at the next opportunity, which would be 4 years from now. I don't think that's going to happen. So my long-term predictions for New York City, without a significant rebound in how they think about how economic policies affect people, this is not a good sign. Markets are, we will just say, jittery at this point. And people are watching carefully. And you might say, well, why do you think people are drawn to this? You know, any time in history, recent history, modern history, or past history, when you look at the economies of various states, provinces, nations, the more they lean socialist, the more they lean leftist, the worse those economies get. Now, some people say, well, no, look at the beautiful, wonderful country of Norway, for instance. It's socialist and the economy is pretty good and people live well. Listen, it's very important to note about Norway. They live on the abundance of their natural resources there, which get oil and gas principally. That in a very small country, something over 5 million people, the resources, the amount of money that they're able to get from taxes, from taxing the resource companies, is huge. And so they're able to afford being able to have social programs that don't run the kind of debt that countries that have to rely on innovation and entrepreneurship run. So you can't, Norway in itself is not what you would call a doctrinaire socialist country. It just has huge windfalls to spend on social programs. That's why I'm very worried about the long term for New York. Once you begin to promise free things to people, and once people experience getting things for free without cost, that's a very difficult thing to turn around. This goes as far back in history. I mean, you can look at modern history today, you can go back into the 20th century, the 19th century. Anytime you have the socialist, communist approaches to economics, you eventually see, and not even eventually, rapid increases in poverty. Hey, this goes way back. You look back in the Old Testament, in the book of Numbers, in chapter 11 and verse 5 there, it talks about, you'll recall the story, whether you're a people of faith or not, the history there is clear. There was this large movement of the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, out of Egypt, where they were held in captivity, into what they hoped would be a promised land. It took a while to get there. But when things got tough, what they wanted was, and it says they cried out to Moses, their leader, and they were quite upset. And they said, look, we want to go back to Egypt where all that stuff was, the good vegetables and the leeks and the onions. What they also said in that verse was that it was there, all those yummy things to eat, at no cost. That was the thing that was really getting them. They could have this good stuff and they could have it free. That's always the appeal, folks. It's never free. So we're seeing people looking to a variety of shifts in investments, and where should they do that? If you want your economy to be strong, the least government, the less oppressive governments, the better you're going to be. People will move to other types of commodities, even moving out of stock markets, which make it then more difficult for large companies and more difficult for retirement funds to flourish. Interesting when you look at the different things that are available in terms of what people are investing in. A story coming out of Texas where a guy was arrested. He had robbed 14 different Target stores in different cities in Texas. Now you're saying, well, why is this significant? What's this got to do with anything? Well, it shows the a rise in large elements of the so-called black market, the illegal economy. What he was stealing was Lego toys. Lego was his target in all of these Target stores, if I can use that. Now you might think, well, this poor guy, why did he like Lego so much? Lego is just one of those many items out there in the alternate market that has huge returns and huge retails. You go on some of the Kijiji forums or some of these sites where you can buy different types of products that you can't get maybe in the mainstream, and you'll see Lego, especially if it's historic Lego, especially if it's classic Lego formations, sells for huge amounts. As a matter of fact, there is an entire market throughout the U.S. in Lego theft and the resale. The more markets get jittery, folks, the more alternate the choices get for people making investments. Just on the world of entertainment, now, it's very important to remember that entertainment and culture are broken into sectors, and many of the sectors are not even aware that the other particular sectors exist. For instance, big item for tens of millions of people is the announcement today, for those of you who are fans of Dancing with the Stars, and I have to confess I'm not a real 24/7 follower of that, but in that particular character, Brooke Burke, who was a winner at one time of Dancing with the Stars, she went on to be a co-host, huge audience, huge following, multi-millions following her, has announced she's not going to be returning. There's a sense there that that particular cultural item which has grabbed millions and millions of viewers and therefore millions and millions of advertising dollars is in fact going into fade. We'll see if that happens, and we wish Brooke Burke all the best. If you've been following, you might be kind of rolling your eyes and say, why would I follow the court case between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni? Why would I follow that? These two actors that are suing each other. Well, one of the interesting developments there, the court costs, by the way, have gone into the it could be $500 million at this point. The reason it's so expensive is they're filing and suing each other. And the question is, how much can you be liable for as a social influencer, someone who's just out there and making memes and laughing at people? How much can you actually be liable for, and could you be sued in terms of what damage you might do to somebody's reputation by how you laugh at them, how you mock them on media and as a social influencers? Courts are really diving into this right now because of this case. It could have ramifications depending which way it goes. If it shows that if you're a social influencer and you're not careful about who you're smearing or attacking, you could wind up in big financial trouble. But if it goes the other way, it's going to be really open season on media, on social influencers being able to trash anybody at will. And the movie that got it all started, where these two are suing each other in terms of there's all kinds of accusations of sexual influence and power structures that were being developed, and even in terms of how the movie was being directed and how it was being acted. And remember, the name of the movie, folks, their movie was It Ends With Us. Looks like it's ending with them, folks. That'll end our show for today. And thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you tomorrow.